program designed for general population, made simple. All right, so before we dive in, we're going to talk about overarching themes for all of this. These three goals that we have for the lifetime of our clients are going to be obviously discussed here. They're going to come up frequently throughout this entire presentation, but they're also going to come up next week when we look at our one-on-one assessment and goal setting session. They're going to come up the week after that when we talk about our personal orientation approach, because it's that important. What are these three things? Consistency. You know, what can we really expect if our people aren't consistent with their training? Crush goals and have fun doing it. If someone's not meeting their goals, they're probably not going to stay with us. And if they're not having fun in the process, I mean, if someone's crushing goals and not having fun, maybe they'll stay. But it's pretty important that we can do both and make the process enjoyable if we want to have long-term success, both for the client and for our business as well. And then last but not least, competency and independence. And in my experience, sometimes people get hung up on this one. Like, why would I want to make my client competent and independent? Because wait a minute, I'll be working myself right out of business. They won't need me anymore. And in my experience, that's just not the case. If someone continues to feel helpless, they can't see the vision, they don't understand where we're going, in my experience, that's where we lose people. Someone that gains confidence, competence, independence over time of training with you is a more robust individual that, say, maybe goes on vacation, has to travel for work, and finds themselves in a shitty hotel and still wants to get a good workout in. You know, the client that's not competent and not independent will probably hit you up and be like, you know, I have no idea what to do. Here's what the hotel has. Can you write me something? And maybe if, you know, you're early on in your career and you have all the time in the world, that's something that you can do, and it's a service you can provide above and beyond. But wouldn't it be awesome if your clients were able to say, hey, you know, I'm in this hotel gym, didn't have a whole lot of equipment, but here's what they did have and here's what I did. And you're like, hey, that's pretty much what I would have written. And I've experienced that a number of times, and it's absolutely awesome. And, you know, the fear of losing those people because they're like, oh, I get this now, just comes from a place of scarcity. You know, in the beginning, sure, people do train with us to understand what to do. They want to learn, they want to get results. But, you know, at least here, at least in my personal experience, that's not why people stay. They stay for the community, the part above it, that they continually crush goals and have fun doing it. And we help them with the consistency component by having someone to meet. But we don't want to make things so confusing for our clients that they never learn a thing. So keep these big three goals in mind as we go throughout all of it: consistency, crush goals and have fun doing it, and competency and independence. And then a few more things before we dive in. Number one, take the time to do it right. The best program is only good as your client's execution of it. So everything you're going to learn here is really only going to get you as far as you can coach it, as far as, you know, you can get with not being emotionally attached to what you write. When you see someone do something, you're like, it's not going like I thought it would. You can't be emotionally attached to that decision. You have to be willing to make changes immediately if the client's not able to execute on it. So, you know, what you're going to learn here, combined with what's coming up next month with all of our coaching, will layer and just make it that much better for everyone involved. And then the neurometabolic continuum from a daily and weekly approach. We're going to keep that in mind, that at least for us with general population, you know, on a daily perspective, we start with things that are more intense after the warm-up, obviously, but we do our power work first. Then we do our bigger neurological demanding work of all of our strength work. Then we start to work our way towards more metabolic with our assistance work, and even more metabolic with our conditioning. And then from a weekly approach, in an ideal world, and we'll talk about why this can be very challenging, in an ideal world, we would also lay it out much the same way across the week. We would pick things earlier in the week that we're more competent with, that we can train really hard with. Obviously, in the beginning, when someone's learning everything, that's not possible. If they're not consistent, that's also not possible. But in an ideal world, we would do things earlier in the week that we have higher levels of competence with, that we can train harder with, more on that neurological side of things. And then we'd work our way more towards the metabolic side of things. And we'll have a slide coming up later on that will really lay that out. But just keep this top of mind. Less is more stands true for intensity, progressions, regressions, even commitment to the number of training days. You know, people start something and they're like, all right, gotta, you know, overhaul my training, gotta be on this crazy diet, gotta do everything perfect. No, like what's one small thing that we can do better? When it comes to progressing weight, someone's like, all right, I think I can go up 20 pounds this week. Like maybe you can, but will that impede your progress next week? Smaller jumps, smaller changes, program to program. And like it says there, even commitment to number of training days. If you think that you can jam pack your schedule, yeah, I can get 3 days of training in, and that's really going to stretch someone. That's probably going to go back to, remember, our big 3 overarching goals. That's probably going to go back and eventually mess up their consistency, because there's a higher likelihood of them burning out or missing a day and thinking, all right, I'll start again next week. So we start easier with our commitments, and that will lead to a greater likelihood of consistency, which will lead to crushing goals and having fun doing it. And even the less is more approach will help with that competency and independence, because it gives them digestible amounts of things that they can easily implement into their lives for the long term. And finally, a quote from the one, the only Todd Bumgardner: you can't edit a sentence until you have one. So when it comes to sitting down and writing a program, don't stare at a blank screen for too long. Just write. Sometimes it helps to almost use a hot pen technique or a hot keyboard technique and just write out the damn program. Then you can go back and say, okay, I want to tweak these things. If you ever find yourself stuck, get something on paper and work from there. And then before we really dive in, let's just get a quick overview of how to read our programs. Obviously, being in Strength Action, if you're following the program, this should look familiar, sans choices. Obviously, on your programs, it's more of a group program, so we have like this one down, one up approach on most things, sometimes, even more. For our clients in semi-private personal training, we make exact exercise prescriptions most of the time. Sometimes there's choice, and that really comes along as they've been with us for longer, or other times maybe I throw a choice in there that's really for the coach to decide. I'll say, Zercher squat or safety bar squat. Circle the one that they choose, and that would be based on what the coach thinks they're going to do better with. But looking at this program, at the top we have their name, what block and phase they're in. For the current block and phase, which is the highlighted one, their power reps, their strength reps, and their assistance reps. That's that PSA, P5, S8, A6. Then next to that, you can see the thought process of where I would like them to go in phase 2. Next to that, phase 3. Next to that, phase 4. And all 4 of those phases combine to make a block. Below that, the person's goals are written out. Below that, we have their FMS, any patterns that were asymmetrical or ones are written down below that. And then any other concerns, this would be notes that came up during their intake process that don't really fall under the FMS, but things that we should keep top of mind when we are coaching them and or writing their next program. Then below that, we have our workout key. And below that, we have our first workout, workout A. We're going to talk about everything on here, what it is, but again, quick overview. Workout A, next to that, we have the types of loading types that we use for power, strength, assistance, and conditioning. And then below that, we have the whole entire workout written out. 1/3, 5, 7/9, 11. Those are the session numbers. We've got a column that has all the exercise names. Things are paired together. The gray and whites, they're paired together by color as well as by letter. So you have A1, A2, A3, all in gray. That's done as a triset. Then B1, B2, B3, done as a triset. C1, C2, done as a superset. And then D1 is done by itself, conditioning at the very end. And again, we're going to dig into all this. Workout B is going to look much the same. And then below that, we have our cool down. So breaking this down a little bit further, we have our power work, followed by our strength work, followed by our assistance, followed by our conditioning. And then the second day, the B workout follows the same process. And then again, our cool down there at the bottom. So now that we're about to get rolling with the actual X's and O's of program design, I want you to screenshot this, print it out, always have this on you, at least in the beginning when it comes to writing programs, because if you have what you need to fill these in, if you have the thought process, if you have the actual information that you would need, in my opinion, this is everything that you'll need to write this person's program. If for your setting you decide there's more, awesome, update this thing, steal it, make it your own, add, remove, modify it as you see necessary. But for me, if I can answer these questions, then I can write a pretty kick-ass training program for this person. So who does this person remind me of? What's their name? their goals, reps for the block for power strength assistance, their FMS and other assessment notes, other concerns notes, number of training days, neurometabolic continuum, movements, number of sets, loading types, rating of perceived exertion, conditioning, and their cooldown. If I can answer those, we're in good shape. So being able to answer those, how does that information impact the program? Well, in a lot of ways. And we're going to start with, who does this person remind me of? The big takeaway here is that we never, ever, ever, ever start with a blank slate. So whatever approach works for you in terms of how you're going to store your programs, never, ever start with a blank slate. Have every program you ever write readily available. We use Dropbox to accomplish this. And the reason being is that whenever I go to write someone's program, I don't just open a blank, we write ours in Microsoft Word. I don't open a blank Word document and create the whole framework and start working from there. I go, who does this person remind me of? And use that person's program as the initial template. And then I look at it and I just say, what modifications do I need to make to put this new person in the best positions to be successful? Obviously, I'm going to change their name at the top. Maybe I'll mess with the reps. I'll put their goals in there. I'll put their FMS concerns in there. Any other notes about them in there. And then below that, just modify that program, honestly, as little as needed to get a viable product in that person's hands that's going to help them go from their point A, where they currently are, to point B, our first stop in terms of acquiring our goals. So have every program you ever write readily available. And for us, we use Dropbox to accomplish this. And this super duper efficiency tip, these types of things are going to come up throughout. If you do each of these, you're also going to be in great shape. So looking at this person's program, we're gonna use this thing throughout the entire presentation. You can pretend this was someone else's name on it. I simply opened that program, switched out their name, switched out their goals, updated those FMS concerns, other concerns. And really that's gonna be the biggest change. After that, it's minimal changes. So changed up this stuff, and we're gonna dig into how I made decisions when it came to these repetitions that you see at the top for power, strength, assistance. So the first thing is that training equals intent. And sometimes I see people get hung up on this when it comes to rating of perceived exertion, selecting repetitions, selecting exercises. And so that's what we're going to talk about first. But training equals intent. What do I mean by that? Well, power, okay? What comes to mind for you with power? Here's what the NSCA has to say. Precisely defined is the time rate of doing work, where work is the product of the force exerted on an object and the distance the object moves in the direction in which the force is exerted. That's direct from the Essentials of Strength Training and Conditioning, 2nd edition. Does that help you? Is that now that you know that, all right, go program your power? I'm not saying that there's no value in there, but for me, all right, that's such a convoluted definition. What's it really about? Power is about intent. So first, let's think of what comes to mind for power. A drag racer bolting off the line, a missile launch, a little bit dated at this point, but Holly Holm head kicking Ronda Rousey nighty-night. Those are all pretty powerful things that we can envision. When it comes to training, it's simply the intent to be explosive with our movement. So the intent to put a hole in the wall with our medicine ball throw, not just kind of lob it at the wall, but try and put it through the wall. In fact, we have a long-standing vet at our gym that if you can throw a medicine ball and go through the concrete wall, to be clear, not the drywall, to go through the concrete wall, your membership is on us for lifetime. We're in our 8th year of business at this point. No one has earned that free membership yet, but maybe at some point. Another idea that could come to mind is fly through the ceiling when we jump. Obviously not going to happen, but our intent is to get up there. And when we can think about that intention of, all right, be like Superman and go through the ceiling, it provides an image, and it helps us when it comes to applying our intentions with program design. So for you right now, if it helps, go ahead and pause this program. I'm not going to sit here with an awkwardly long silence, but knowing that we're talking about intention, the intent to be explosive with our movements, what exercises come to mind for you? So go ahead and pause, create a big list, and then hit resume. And I'm going to talk through my thought process on this. So for me, exercises for power, and this is what we're using a lot in our facility: medicine ball throws and slams, landing and jumps, Indian clubs. And you might be wondering, how in the world are Indian clubs power? But if you would see like what Gray Cook and the guys at Functional Movement through the fundamental capacity screen are teaching in terms of teaching how to synchronize like hip and arm movement and everything, you can do some awesome explosive power work with Indian clubs. Kettlebell ballistics, sandbag ballistics, sprints, loaded, unloaded, loaded sprints. I don't mean like parachutes or anything, but you know, like sled work, ski erg sprints, Airdyne bike sprints, rower sprints, speed lifts. Maybe you're throwing in Olympic lifts. We don't use a lot of those in our facility, especially with general population, but if you do, awesome. Maybe that made its way into your list. But now to take it a step further, I want you to think about, I kind of threw categories on there. And we're not going to list it all out in this presentation because it would go on forever and ever. But with each of those things, especially like medicine ball throws and slams, could you list an order of lowest skill acquisition to highest level of skill acquisition? So, okay, these are ones that are pretty self-limiting. I just tell the person, boom, take this thing overhead, throw it at the wall, and people can do that from day one. And maybe you have ones like we use, like a crossover step lateral medicine ball throw that takes a little bit more coordination, and maybe I wouldn't start there right away, but there's still power, and it gets us to think about progressing someone over the long term. So, you know, I would recommend at some point even writing that kind of stuff out, and it will help you when you go to write programs over the long term. Reps for power. The NSCA talks about 3 to 5 sets of 3 to 5 reps at 75 to 85% of 1 rep max for multiple effort event, 1 to 2 reps at 80 to 90% 1 rep max for single effort event. Okay, let's go back a slide here. So 3 to 5 reps, 3 to 5 sets of 3 to 5 reps at 75 to 85% 1 RM. Okay, so I'm thinking about programming an overhead medicine ball throw with step for a client. All right, overhead medicine ball throw with step, 3 to 5 sets, 3 to 5 reps at 75 to 85% 1 rep max. Shit. How am I going to determine their 1 rep max for that overhead medicine ball throw? Okay. Not helpful. There you go, Wes. Or Kirk, whoever it is that started that, but not helpful. At the end of the day, it comes down to training equals intent. So if our intent is maximum velocity, speed, power, explosiveness, whatever you want to call it, we've got to think about how much could we provide a little bit of a training effect, but without taking it too far to where we're no longer training that. So for us, you know, you could argue a number of different numbers here, but 1 to 8 reps at an RPE of 5 to 8, and I'll tell you right now, I'd probably maybe one time this year, if even one time this year, have programmed a single rep for power for someone. Most of the time for us, it's really going to live in the world of like 2 to 8 reps. RPE 5 to 8, 8's really, really high end. That would only be if someone in here was doing, you know, I said we don't do them, but sometimes we do, like hang power clean, and someone is strong, is competent. Maybe we'll program that at an 8, but that's also going to be rare. The big thing is that we want to make selections here that are a number of repetitions that allow them to maintain velocity rep to rep. If velocity starts dropping off, then we're no longer really training the quality, training with our intention, speed, power, explosiveness, whatever you want to call it. And at that point, we're kind of not kind of, we are no longer giving them the best thing for them. So we have to keep our intention in mind, and then we have to pick appropriate rep and RPE ranges that they can express that intent. When it comes to strength, it's going to be very similar. For us, the intent is to incrementally add weight to compound movements. Pretty simple definition. So once again, if you want to pause it here, list off your most common strength exercises. This doesn't just mean like all resistance training, but think truly the intent. You want to get someone strong. What's the bag of tricks that you're going to, you know, start pulling stuff out of? What's that look like? What's in there? So go ahead and pause it, list yours off. Then when you're ready, hit resume. We're going to go on. We're going to look at what I've got here. So exercises for strength, this is a pretty limited list. If I really wanted to rack my brain, I could come up with more. And the biggest thing is I could come up with 1,000 variations under each one, but really squats, deadlifts, presses, rows, pull-ups, both loaded and unloaded, you could argue and say, hey, for some people, push-ups or strength. Like I said, this is not an exhaustive list. Whatever you have written down, as long as you have a why and you're like, yeah, this applies, I would consider this to be a strength training exercise. The intention to get strong, these would fit, then awesome. But for us, squats, variety of implements. I mean, just think like a goblet squat, a Zercher squat, a safety bar squat, a front squat, a back squat, like all the different squat variations, deadlifts, even just saying, with a barbell could be rack pull deadlifts, block pulls, could be deficits, could be, whatever variation comes to mind. And that's not even getting into different stances. And then beyond that, getting into different implements that we could use. And I could go on and on with presses, with rows, with pull-ups, loaded, unloaded. And what we can do is we can start to categorize these different things in terms of lowest skill acquisition to highest level of skill acquisition. And then we can make it easier on ourselves, just like power, when we go to write programs for newer people and say, hey, this is a pretty self-limiting choice. It's not going to suck up a ton of time coaching the heck out of it, which means that someone's going to hopefully be able to train pretty hard with it right away so that they can express their intent, so they can get to their goal. Then in that case, we've made the best exercise selection. So the more time that you spend on the front end writing this stuff out, writing out your thought process, writing out kind of your spectrum of choice on these things, the easier it will be when you can refer back to that in writing programs for people. And then the NSCA says 2 to 6 sets of 6 or fewer reps at 85% 1 rep max or greater. And that could work for all of this stuff here. But the reality is that with our general population clients, we're just not testing rep maxes on anything. And further, with our people, there's, with anyone, not just with general population, but there's the idea of the cost of doing business, and testing people like that and then saying, okay, this is going to be the numbers that we're going to train off of for the next 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, whatever weeks. We just don't do that. I think there's safer ways to go about it. So not helpful for our context. But these RPEs and these rep ranges that you're seeing, as I'm sitting here poo-pooing on the NSCA, I'm not really poo-pooing on the NSCA because this stuff is still influenced by them and kind of the thought process of what they're throwing out there with their percentage of 1 rep max. Our RP is kind of based off the same, but we're just not using percentage. So again, the interesting thing is that it's 1 to 8 reps again, same thing that it was for our power. The RP is a little bit different, but why would that be? Well, doing 2 reps of a kettlebell swing, right? A kettlebell swing is a power choice in my mind. I'm going to say it's power choice versus 2 reps in a front squat, which is going to be a strength choice. Could you make it power? Sure. I'm not here to argue that, but just 1 for strength, the front squat, 1 for power, the kettlebell swing, both done for 2 reps. And let's say both done at an RPE of 7. Well, let's think of intent again. Our intent with that kettlebell swing is velocity. So knowing that RPE says that we should have, RPE 7 says that we should have about 3 reps left in the tank, that would mean for the kettlebell swing that we have at least 3 reps left in the tank at that velocity with no drop off in speed. For the squat, it would mean that we have about 3 reps left in the tank before we would get to technical failure. Not failure, but technical failure, before our technique would break down. So same repetitions, same rating of perceived exertion, but different outcome, different application because intent, okay? Hopefully that makes sense. Assistance. Exercises for assistance. Some people call this accessory work. We call it assistance. Take a minute, pause, and before you do that, if you're thinking, I don't know what you're talking about, think about all the things that you would do, like we talked about. Our strength work is our bigger, usually bilateral, but there's arguments you could make for, hey, someone can't squat, but split squat, that's their strength work. I'm with you, 100%. That sounds great to me. But think of the things that you would probably do secondary to your strength work, and you can look at the Strength Faction program kind of for a cheat on this, and that you would use to bring up other physical qualities to complement the goal, okay? So what other resistance training exercises would you commonly use? Pause the video here, list them off, and when you're ready, hit play, check out my thoughts. So in my mind, exercises for assistance, this list could be huge, but I broke it down pretty straightforward. Unilateral lifts, example, lunges. Combination lifts, example, something like a barbell row, like a bent over barbell row. Sorry, that is totally a typo. That's supposed to say bent over row to barbell RDL. I'll get that fixed, but for now, we're just gonna roll with it. So bent over row, barbell RDL. And combination lifts are things that just kind of seamlessly go together like that. It could also be like whenever you see kind of that hyphen between, that means it seamlessly goes into one. So remember, knowing that it's supposed to say bent over row to barbell RDL, that would mean that we hinge down, row the bar up, back down, then we stand back up, then we do our next barbell RDL. So it's just seamless like that. Another variation might be something like a double kettlebell clean plus push press. So we would do a double kettlebell clean, we would pause, get ourselves set, then we would drive into the push press. So there'd be like a pause between a clear line of like, okay, the double kettlebell clean ended there, then they went into the push press. Higher volume bilateral lifts. Could be the same things you use for strength, but now just applying more volume, less intensity. This could be used as your assistance work. Different planes of motion. This is where we fit in things like rotation, maybe odd stances. Think of like lateral lunges, things like that, or the example here, rotational landmine press. Reps for assistance. The NSCA doesn't really have a distinction that they call assistance, but they have different categories here: hypertrophy and muscular endurance. Hypertrophy, 3 to 6 sets of 6 to 12 reps at 67 to 85% of 1 rep max. Muscular endurance, 2 to 3 sets of greater than or equal to 12 reps at less than or equal to 67% 1 rep max. Every time I present this, I always think like, I would love to understand how they came to the exact line, not 66%, not 68%, but 67% 1 rep max. The reality is, once again, as I'm sure you know, I don't have 1 rep max on my clients' lunges, their barbell, their bent over row barbell RDL, barbell RDL to bent over row, on their rotational landmine press, and I'm not going to go ahead and gather those things. So once again, not helpful, but we can still think about the intent. So once again, still influenced by the NSCA with these kinds of things, and thinking back to like, look at traditional bodybuilding type programming when someone wants to get strong, whatever, what rep ranges come to mind for you? So for me, I've made 4 categories here, and these are really common rep ranges, probably the most common rep ranges that we use in our facility all the time. So we're looking for hypertrophy, maybe 6 to 12 reps, muscular endurance, 12 to 20 reps, strength hypertrophy hybrid, 5 to 10 reps, hypertrophy muscular endurance hybrid, maybe 8 to 15 reps. But just think through it. Your intention is to create this adaptation. How many reps would that take? Applying the knowledge once again from influences like the NSCA, but getting rid of the 1RM and using rating of perceived exertion. So now putting this together and planning the month with rep schemes. So those reps that you saw at the top, look, we had the highlighted one on Karen's program. So we had PSA. Those reps make phases. 4 of those phases make blocks, and then blocks make, whatever, how long you can be training that person. They could be on block 20 with you eventually. So we organize our reps month to month through a nonlinear alternating periodization approach. Do we always do this? Almost entirely, yes, but there are occasional times where we don't. But I always present this because 9 times out of 10, this is what we're going to use. So think your typical linear approach, okay? So that would look something like this: 8, 6, 4, 3. For 1 month, they did 8 reps of the front squat. The next month, they're going to do 6 reps. The next month, they're going to do 4 reps. The next month, they're going to do 3 reps. So they just worked their way down, increasing the intensity as they go. What we do is we still start in the same example with 8, but then we flip the middle 2 numbers. So we're going 8, 6, 4. Now it's going to go 8, 4, 6. So we're going to have this jump from 8. Then we're going to drop the, then we're going to shoot the intensity up. Then we're going to bring it back down a little bit, do some 6s. And then we're going to drop down to our highest intensity with threes. Okay? So if each of those numbers represents a phase, so the example I just gave, those were all strength, right? If each of those numbers represents a phase of training, which for us is typically 4 to 6 weeks, all 4 of them would create a block. And that would look like this on the program. So Karen's program, her block 1, the part that's highlighted, she's doing power 5s. She's doing power 5s, 3s, 4, 2. So the highlighted one, her current phase 1, she's doing power 5, strength 8, assistance 6. That's the highlighted part. Phase 2, I've said I think we're going to go to power 3, strength 4, assistance 10. Then phase 3, 4, 6, 8. Phase 4, 2, 3, 12. And so she has that first one highlighted, then it gets crossed off, the next one's highlighted. So this would be her second program with us. Then that one's crossed off, the third one's highlighted. This would be her third program with us. And the fourth one, the third one gets crossed off and the fourth one gets highlighted. That would be her fourth program with us. Now, I'm picking these repetitions based on everything that we just went over back here, right? All the things that we just went over with this stuff. How many reps, what RP, everything. And I'm just making choices that make sense towards her goals based on her assessment, based on her goals, what she wants to do. And then I'm making choices of what I think is going to make sense for her to work on over the next 4 months. This saves me so much time whenever it comes to making choices month to month. If you've ever opened a program, let's say someone just finished a phase of training with you, and the next month you're like, crap, what should I do rep-wise? Well, they did this. We could do that. We could go here. You're right. You could drive yourself insane with thinking through choices. But instead, we just think about working our way through these reps, and we're going to dig into a little bit more how to do that. And in this case, then she'll go into block 2. And we're going to dig into it a little bit more. So for power, she did 5, 3, 4, 2. So really what she did, we said, okay, for her power work, we're going to start her off with 5 repetitions. At the furthest end, we're going to work our way down to 2. So we could step there by going 5, 4, 3, 2, and we just flip the middle 2 numbers. So it becomes 5, 3, 4, 2. The next block, which I honestly don't plan this far in advance, but maybe for her next block, we decide to go for power still, 8, 5, 6, 3, and the third block, 6, 3, 5, 2. If she's training 3 days a week, that is 1 year of programming right there, pre-selected the repetition schemes for 1 year, because block 1, that's 4 months, 1 month of 5s, 1 month of 3s, 1 month of 4s, 1 month of 2s. Block 2, 1 month of 8s, 1 month of 5, 1 month of 6, 1 month of 3s. Block 3, 1 month of 6s, 1 month of 3s, 1 month of 5, 1 month of 2s. 4 times 3, 12. That's 12 months of training right there. And you'll notice, again, as I keep saying, for us, it's always highest to lowest with the middle 2 flipped. For strength, I'm not going to go on and on, drone on here about this. It's the same thing. We just pick repetitions that make sense for our goal based on her intake, everything she wants to do, what makes sense for this person. And we work our way from the highest to the lowest number with the middle 2 flipped again. So in an example here, 8, 4, 6, 3 for a block. Then 10, 6, 8, 4 for a block. Then 6, 3, 5, 2 for a block. And there you have a year of repetitions picked out for her strength. Then for assistance, we have block 1. This is what she's currently doing. 6, 10, 8, 12. The next block, maybe she does 8, 12, 10, 15. The next block, maybe 5, 8, 6, 10. But did you catch what happened? For us, for our assistants, we always work our way lowest to highest in terms of the numbers. So where our power worked its way from 5 to 2, 8 to 3, 6 to 2. Our strength, 8 to 3, 10 to 4, 6 to 2. In these examples, our assistants went from 6 to 12, 8 to 15, 5 to 10. Why do you think that is? Well, for us, this kind of came about by, for lack of better terms, trial and error. If I write someone's program, so let's say for power, let's just look at Karen's program. 5 reps. She's doing some type of a med ball throw for 5 reps. She's doing some core stuff with that. She's doing some mobility work, and she does that as a tri-step. Then she makes her way onto her strength training portion of her day. And she's going to do, let's say, goblet squats. She's going to do 3 sets of 8. Maybe that's paired with inverted row, 3 sets of 8, and then some type of, we'll say, Gandalf shoulder cars. And she does that for 3 rounds, that tri-set. Then she comes along to assistance, and if we had started with the highest number, remember, she's done 5s, she's done 8s. Now, if we start with the highest number, she'd be doing 12s of something. Imagine having a beginner do that much volume, especially when considering that if we go back to what our common assistance exercises are, rotational, single leg, single leg, single arm, unilateral work, combination lifts, or just higher volume bilateral work. That would be like the one exception that would work. But think about the single leg, single arm, the rotational work, all these combination lifts. Imagine telling someone after doing everything else they did, okay, now we have 12 reps of this. Their levels of fatigue, especially early on, they're novice to training, that's gonna be entirely too much for them. But maybe we're saying, okay, for their assistance work, she did, in our example, we just said goblet squat, inverted row, Gandalf shoulder cars. So it's getting a little ahead of myself here because we're going to get into exercise selection, but maybe now that was her strength, maybe now for her assistance, she's going to go cook hip lift for 6 on each leg. She's going to do a modified push-up for 6 reps, and she's going to go through that for 2 to 3 rounds. Well, now those are manageable numbers. The intensity isn't real high on those. You can see the application of assistance exercises. And we can work her up in volume across those types of things over the next 4 phases. So even with advanced people, and you can see it in the Strength Action program, we still flip it like this: lowest number and work our way up to the highest number. So if we go all the way through back to our power, in phase 4, she'll be doing 2s. So her intensity will be higher in phase 4 on her power. She'll be doing 3s on her strength. So that's much higher intensity than when she was doing 8s. And now instead of crushing her with intensity on her assistance, that's where we're going to fit some volume in. So we talked about that daily neural metabolic continuum. And that's just being applied here to where she's very neurological with her power, with her strength in phase 4. And then we're going to get more mechanical stress with her 12s and her assistance in phase 4. Okay, so that's why we do it, and we've seen really, really good results with that. So super duper efficiency tip: write down all the most common rep schemes that you yourself use, and then that way, the next time you sit down and you think, where should I go next? 1, if you have a program written, going forward, I hope that you never have that thought process again, because when you sit down to write someone's program, you should pull up the most common rep schemes you use and say, okay, this person with their goals, I'm going to stay at this range of strength. They're newer, so I'm going to start them with 8 so that we have enough repetitions to really gain competency, and because they don't have the ability to really use that much intensity yet. So starting a beginner with 5s doesn't make sense to me. If you have that kind of a thought process, boom, you get it. So you decide to start, at 8s, and you're going to work your way down to 3s like we did with Karen's program, right? Boom. Then, for their assistance, all right, this person, I think for their goal, it makes sense for them to do some hypertrophy work. So you go back to my assistance ranges and you go, okay, hypertrophy, 6 to 12 reps. Yeah, we're going to use that. If you start thinking like that as you write out your programs and you're planning blocks at a time, it's just going to be so much easier for you. So seriously, do all these super duper efficiency tips. Write down the most common rep schemes you use, have them readily available, and use them. Thank me later. All right, so we just tore through that. Hope that makes sense. If anything on here ever doesn't make sense, don't think that you're on an island. Just be like, oh, maybe I'll figure it out at some point. Ask questions in the open forum, and I will do whatever it takes to make this stuff clear for you guys. So, makes sense, but how many sets do we do? Great question, because I know you just asked that. That's why I assume. I know you just asked that because I can tell. I'm smart like that. Well, here's how we go about sets and reps. The first week, so I'm just gonna go back out so you can see what happens. So the first week is this blue column on the far left. And what I did to make this so you can see everything is I'm gonna kind of split it so that the exercises are next to the week. But below that, if we could see the whole program, Then workout B would be the same, would be complementary. So just know that this is applied throughout the week. So right here we have the first and third workout. This is the first week in combination with the second workout if someone was training 3 days a week, okay? So they're gonna do overhead medicine ball slam, plank, rib grab, T-spine rotation. 2 to 3 sets of 5 repetitions. 2 to 3 sets of 30 seconds, 2 to 3 sets of 3 to 5 breaths on each side. So they would do 5 overhead medicine ball slams, hold the plank for 30 seconds, hold the rib grab T-spine rotation. They would go out there and hold for 3 to 5 breaths on each side, and then they would repeat that circuit 2 to 3 times. After that, they would progress on to their strength, and they would do the goblet squat for 8 reps, inverted row for 8 reps, Gandalf shoulder cars for 2 reps on each side. Then they would go back to the top. They would do that for 3 rounds. That's their strength. Then their assistance, standing handcuff hinge for 6 reps, farmer carry 200 feet, go back to the top, do it for a second round. That is their assistance. Then finally their conditioning, fixed battling ropes, which means time work, fixed time rest, 3 to 5 rounds of 10 seconds of work with 20 seconds of rest, okay? So this is our first week of the program. You can look at the number of sets, the number of reps that we use. Number 1, we're kind of thinking through about how long this would take. In our setting, it takes about an hour, or we schedule about every hour we have a turnover in clients. So we have our 6 a.m., our 7 a.m., our 8 a.m. We don't want people going significantly over the hour mark because we'll run into problems of flow throughout the facility. If someone wants, we can make it shorter, but most of the time we're thinking about an hour. So in writing this program, I'm looking at this thinking, for this person, this is going to take them about an hour to get through. And in this first week, their goal is to just set a baseline, hence base. So on anything that has a rating of perceived exertion, their goal, especially the ones that have weights, their goal is to overhead medicine ball slam, 7, okay? So they're gonna pick something that has a little bit of weight to pick up, but that they can still move at a high rate of velocity. So maybe the first set, they grab a 4-pounder and they do it, and you're like, all right, on a scale of 1 to 10, how'd that feel? And they're like, that felt like a 3, that was nothing. Okay, well, let's go up, to the 8-pound medicine ball. For the goblet squat, intention now, strength. They do their first set of 8 with a 16-kilo kettlebell. Hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being like I could do 0 additional reps with good form, 1, I could do that forever. Where do you fall? And they say, that felt like about a 7. You're like, okay, so you feel like you had about 3 quality reps left in the tank? Yep, awesome, great choice. Whatever it is, this first week, this base week is a feeling out process, figuring out what numbers make sense for those. And we have 2 to 3 sets, 3 sets, 2 sets, whatever, to find those numbers the first week, base week. The second week, we're on to our train week. So now we've figured out what worked in the first week, and we're going to train off those numbers in the second week. You'll notice that sets and reps and rating of perceived exertion are exactly the same in the second week. Doesn't mean that the weights need to be exactly the same. We just have a good starting point because we set our base, built our base in week 1. So we have those numbers to look off of. So maybe we do, we get through our warm-ups using the goblet squat as an example. We go, okay, last week, I did I forget what I said now, but 16-kilo kettlebell for 8, and I felt like a 7. And they do their first set there this week, and they're like, oh man, it's easier. We all know about those beginner gains. Nervous system acclimates pretty quickly. Today, they slept great. They got those beginner gains going. They've been eating well. They're feeling, highly energetic. And they're like, yo, that 16-kilo kettlebell today, that felt like a 5 or a 6. Awesome. Let's give the 20-kilo kettlebell a shot next time. But at least we had that baseline to train off of. So we're just going to bump the numbers up a little bit in the second week. Maybe some of them are going to stay the same. Maybe they slept like shit and everything else, and they're going to come back down a little bit. But at least we had that base from week 1 to train off of. Then week 3, PR and go home week. So here you'll see that, remember, the sets and reps were the same in week 1 and week 2. 2 to 3, 3, 2, 3 to 5. Here we're going to go 1 to 2, 2, 2, 4 to 6. So our power, our strength, and our assistance all went lower, right? Check that out. Our assistance stayed the same. But our power, our strength, both went lower. Our assistance stayed the same. And then if you look, our conditioning jumped up. It went from 3 to 5, and it jumped to 4 to 6. So here, PR and go home. Set a personal record and go home. When someone's brand new to training, more than likely, these are going to be lifetime PRs. When someone's been training with us for a decent amount of time, we're just looking to set a program PR here. So because we're looking to move more weight in this week, we're going to rest a little bit longer. So this is still going to take us about an hour to get through, maybe, might be a little bit less. It's still going to take about an hour to get through, and especially with the additional volume and conditioning at the end. So where maybe it's not going to take us quite as long to get through 1 to 2 sets, 2 sets, 2 sets. We're going to do a little additional conditioning to still bring that session to about an hour. But now, for each of these things, like I said, they're going to, especially when it comes to like their squat, inverted row, maybe for their squat, boom, they're going for the 24 kilo this week and they crush it, knock it out. For the inverted row, they walked themselves much lower. They got a much harder angle, knocked out their 8, awesome. But they set these new PRs. Maybe they don't too. Let's also be aware of that maybe they don't, but that's the goal here. It gives them something to strive for. That's our PR and go home week. Then in week 4, our reach week, and the reason why, let's just go back for 1 second. The reason why we have Dan John on there is that this concept is highly influenced by him. Week 4, reach week, is influenced by this guy right here, Joe Ken. He's the strength coach for the Carolina Panthers. And, he talked, if you haven't watched it, do it. Go to the NSCA website. I think there's a link in one of the articles that we're going to post here in Strength Action. But he did a talk for the NSCA called like macros, micros, mesos, and talks about his approach to weightlifting. It's not the same as ours, but anytime you listen to something, it's like, all right, what's something I'm going to take away from this? Maybe nothing, and that's cool. But with his, the big thing I took away was this flipping of, in traditional programming, most people, their first 2 weeks look a lot like ours. Maybe they don't call it that, but you kind of set a baseline in week 1. You train off that baseline in week 2. But then in week 3, in a lot of traditional programming, you jump the volume way up and do what we call a reach. Then in week 4, you would do a deload, and then you'd be on to your next program. Well, Joe Ken laid out this awesome case for why he doesn't do that with his football players. And I'm sitting there listening to it, and I'm like, all right, well, I don't really train football players, but even for my general population people, I think this makes sense. And our thought process is that week 1, going back to it, week 1, we set that baseline. We start to build a level of competency, figuring things out, both the movements and what weights are appropriate. Week 2, we train off that. We continue on that same line. Week 3, now, before we crush ourselves with volume, we try and really move some weight. So we're on to our 7th and 9th exposure to this exact workout. That's what that 7/9 means. That's our 7th and our 9th session. We're going to do this. We're going to have all that time with those previous sessions of doing this stuff. We're going to come in and we're going to crush it intensity wise here. Then in week 4, our reach week, we don't really need a deload with these people. Our base week is basically a deload. Their next program, we're going to drop the volume back down. We're going to decrease the intensity. Maybe some of the exercises are going to get changed. So inherently, there's going to be a little bit of a deload built in that way. So instead, what we do with reach week is you look, everything jumped up. Our power goes 3 to 4 sets. Our strength goes up to 4 sets. Our assistance goes up to 3 sets. And then our conditioning drops down to make up for all the additional time that was spent on our power, strength, and assistance, right? So here, there's a couple things that we could do. We could, especially with beginners, say, hey, you just found out you could move all that weight in your PR and go home week. Look how much stronger you are now, or at least your confidence in being able to do those things. Do you think that you could get through this session in reach week in the same amount of time? So that means less rest with the same weights. And maybe they tackle it that way. Or maybe, their goal is they really crush the weights and they could not do that for that many reps this week. Maybe it's that they're going to go back and use the weights they used during their train week. And they're going to crush that for the additional round and get through it in the same amount of time. And maybe it's going to be some kind of a hybrid where this week they're going to, pyramid their way up. They're going to use some weights that they used in their train week. They're going to hit maybe one top set their reach week and then back down for a set or two, and go about that way. But regardless, no matter what, there's some conversations that happen here with the coaches. There's some internal dialogue that they have in terms of choice, but it gives them weekly aims, and that's how we go about setting our set and rep schemes by the week. But what about conditioning? You know, in past presentations, I didn't talk about this a ton, and thought it was about time that we expand on that. So number one, again, we need to talk about intent. So our intent with conditioning, keep the goal or goals in mind always, and that's true for anything, right? But talk about conditioning, keep the goal or goals in mind always. What's their resting heart rate? We're going to talk about how we got that in next week's, 2 weeks from now in that lesson. But still, what's their resting heart rate? We're going to build or maintain an aerobic base. That's our goal, our intent. Build or maintain an aerobic base. Expand the aerobic window. Don't smoke people or rarely do it. So the aerobic base is just lower resting heart rate, ability to do prolonged work without, tapping into going across our aerobic threshold. So an individual that's able to walk flights and flights and flights of stairs without their heart rate jumping up into their throat is probably going to have a better aerobic base. And right tied in with that, expand the aerobic window. This would be the distance between someone's resting heart rate and their aerobic threshold. So meaning, let's make this very non-scientific and just make it the way that I would explain it to a client. So let's say your resting heart rate is 70. And I put you on a bike and I say, I want you to go ahead and pedal. And I want you to, we're going to go for the next, 6 minutes here. So this is kind of a modified Cooper's test. I'm not going to go into all the detail, but for 6 minutes, I want you to go as far as you can on that bike. But here's the deal. I don't want you to come out the gate like a bat out of hell. I want you to kind of ramp up and find a speed that you feel like you could maintain, but that if you went any faster, your respiration will get so high, your heart rate will get so high that you would have to slow down. So we want to find that line. So that line where you're riding the line of, I could do this for a really long time, but if you go any higher, your heart rate would jump and you'd have to slow down. Very loosely speaking, that would be your aerobic, anaerobic threshold, okay? So the distance between that number and your resting heart rate is your aerobic window. So if someone's resting heart rate is 70, and at 160, their heart rate is too high for them to be able to continue that activity. So 70 plus, the distance between 70 and 60 is going to be 90 beats. Now let's say an individual has a resting heart rate of 50, and that happens at 170. Well, that person has a range of 120 beats in their aerobic window. That person is going to be able to go out and do more things without tapping into their anaerobic or primarily anaerobic energy systems, and probably just generally enjoy life more. Keep up with their kids, go play pickup sports, and really the biggest thing, probably avoid the likelihood of potential injury. Once we get fatigued, form breaks down, we start to compensate, and we're more likely to get injured. So when we can expand that aerobic window, we're helping people in so many ways. And then below that, we have don't smoke people or rarely do it. Remember, we talked about consistency, crush goals and have fun doing it, competency and independence. Consistency. If we smoke people, if we crush people and they're like, I don't even know if I can do this again, there's only so long that someone can take that before it starts to impact their ability to show up. And maybe they're showing up, but they're not showing up as their best self. And eventually that's going to turn into attendance issues. And you see this, I'm not picking on CrossFit, but I know there are good CrossFit facilities out there that don't do this, but I also know, because we get their members, that there are places that just keep pushing that accelerator and smoke people all the time. And eventually they're like, I love this, but I can't do it anymore. And they come find a place like us that gets it, and will put something together that makes more sense for that individual. So I'm not saying that we can't ever do it, but if we're going to do it, it needs to be pretty rare. And we'll talk about when that could be. So within a program, we do things like this as finishers. So on Karen's program here, she had fixed battling ropes, 3 to 5 sets of 10 seconds work, 20 seconds rest in week 1. We just talked about that as we went through our set and rep schemes week to week. The other day, she had assault bike, easy pace. So 1 mile in week 1, 1.5 miles in week 2, 2 miles in week 3, and then drops back down to 1 to 1.5 mile in week 4. So there's so many approaches that we could do, right? And that's what's kept me from including this in program design before. I'm like, this needs to be its own presentation entirely. But the big takeaway is, we use especially speaking to finishers here, we use the final 3 to 15, maybe even more of our sessions, all dependent upon what we want and need to do. But we still make choices that make sense. So we could use things like fixed, the example I showed with the battling ropes, variable, fixed, variable, variable, variable. So variable fixed would mean work to a set heart rate if someone's wearing a heart rate monitor, work to a set heart rate, rest for a fixed amount of time. Fixed variable, work for a set amount of time, rest to a set heart rate. Variable, work up to a set heart rate, rest to a set heart rate, and repeat. Density work would be, every minute on the minute, do 10 kettlebell swings, whatever. That, examples could go on and on. Timed circuits. Maybe we say, all right, 10 minutes on the clock. We're going to go through these 4 different things. You're going to do sled push, you're going to do the ski erg, you're going to do leopard crawl and farmer carry, and you would say the distances to go on each one. Clock set for 10 minutes and just go. However many rounds you get, record it. Movement quality over movement quantity, big here. Distance would be like the assault bike example that you just saw in Karen's program. 1 mile in week 1, 1.5 mile in week 2, 2 miles in week 3, 1 to 1.5 mile in week 4. If you want to make that even more fun, even though it said easy pace on hers, still at something that she would consider to be an easy pace, record how long it took you to get 1 mile, 1.5, 2, 1 to 1.5, and compare those week to week. Because if you're still feeling like you're working at an easy pace, at an easy effort level, but you're getting the same amount of, or you're getting the same distance done in the same time, so like compare week 1 to week 4, or week 2, week 3, those times aren't, significantly different, you can also see improvement that way. So in thinking through that, how would or could you progress these? So think of Karen's program right now that we saw in this example. So she had 10 seconds on, 30 seconds off for battling ropes. I could change the exercise next month. I could put multiple exercises in there and still go with 10-30s and just like add a little bit more variety and maybe do something to really round it out and make it full body. I'm gonna challenge her that way. I could take that 10-30 and maybe start to do more time work, less time rest. Maybe it goes to 15-25. But think through logically, how could you progress each of these? How could you start someone really easily? And then how could you progress that across a block? And now think, we're picking our reps for power, strength, assistance. We pick our loading types for conditioning, and we think about how we can progress them across the month. It's just going to be so easy when we sit down to write their next phase. So lots of approaches. The biggest thing is you have to have a solid why. If I'm looking at one of your programs and you're asking me for help and I say, well, hey, talk me through why you picked this, and you're like, oh no, I just threw it in there. Like, that won't work, and it's not going to work for your client either. So have a solid why for this stuff, and I can promise you that if you're thinking through it in the ways that I'm talking about here, things are going to work out all right. But if they don't, you can't be emotionally attached to it. Remember that. Be willing to make changes. So another thing to look at with conditioning is that if their resting heart rate, this is something newer for us with us testing resting heart rate on intake, but if their resting heart rate is greater than 65 beats per minute, we'll likely be skipping their assistance work. And there's a lot of reasons why we might skip assistance work. If someone's brand new, totally green to training, we're probably just going to do their power work, their strength work, and then we're going to go to conditioning. Because we don't want to overwhelm them with teaching them a million different movements, right? But let's say that we decided, hey, this person's newer, we're going to do power, we're going to do strength, we're going to do assistance and conditioning, but oh wait, their resting heart rate's above 65 beats per minute. More than likely, we're going to pull their assistance so that we can spend more time doing low intensity conditioning to finish their session. And that looks something like this. So I'm going to zoom in here on the very bottom. We'll go back actually. So this example, this is someone else. Overhead medicine ball throw a step, push-up position plank, rib grab T-spine rotation. They had a hinge combo where they're learning to deadlift. So they're doing handcuff hinge, immediately followed by kettlebell deadlift, 4 reps of each. Modified push-up, 8 reps. Gandalf shoulder cars, 2 reps on each side, 3 to 4 rounds of that. And then instead of going on to assistance, they're going to do light marching, sled push, cross crawl, and farmer carry. They're going to set a clock for 10 minutes in week 1. They're going to do 100 feet of the sled push. They're going to do 20 yards cross crawl, 100 feet of the farmer carry, and they're just going to get as many rounds of that as they get in 10 minutes, keeping a cardiac output intensity. So if they're not wearing a heart rate monitor, the goal for this person right here, the goal is near continuous movement, but able to breathe through their nose the entire time. So we're keeping them at a low enough heart rate that we're not bringing the intensity so high that we get away from what we're looking to do. We want to keep the intensity low throughout this session so that we're getting more of those aerobic gains than pushing them to anaerobic, where we're just fatiguing them more and not really getting any benefit from it. The other day would be complementary to that. So reverse sled drag, cross crawl, slosh pipe search carry in this example. But what if you were able to control the schedule across the whole week? Remember, we talked about that neurometabolic continuum earlier, and here's the slide that will kind of lay that out. So an example of it, working our way across the week, Monday through the weekend. We start more neurologically demanding and we work our way to more metabolically demanding. This is really the approach that for the most part we follow in Strength Faction. So on Monday, we're going to look at doing higher intensity strength and power work. And more on the speed power end of energy system development finishers. Wednesday, medium high intensity strength and power, middle of the road energy system development finishers. And then Friday, more time under tension or volume with our lifting. Then maybe on Tuesday, we're going to like stimulate the work we did on Monday, maybe a little bit of conditioning, a lot of things that could go there, but something that makes sense for the goals. On Thursday, a recovery movement day, something like Fury Thursday. Then on the weekend, get in some good cardiac output work, really work on that aerobic base, drive recovery so they can come back and hit it hard neurologically on Monday again. If someone wanted to put themselves in the trash can, so that person I said, don't smoke people or rarely do it. If someone's like, hey, I really, really, really want to crush it, well, then maybe Friday, we do some of our unilateral work. And then we do some type of a conditioning challenge or, your WOD or something on that day that's more metabolically demanding. And that would be the day to do it, followed by cardiac output over the weekend to drive recovery so that we can hit it hard again on Monday. If that's something that someone feels like they need to do, that's where we would do it. And here's the summer 2018 phase 1 Strength Faction workout that I think is a pretty good representation of this kind of a layout. So we had, power, core, mobility. This is the hips program, deadlift clusters, their presses, cars, and then their conditioning was 10 seconds on, 30 seconds off. So remember, we're really talking about conditioning here and laying out the week, 10 seconds on, 30 seconds off. Then the second day where it was like stimulate or some type of conditioning, here they're doing carry ladders. So they already deadlifted on Monday. So I'm not overly concerned about their grip after that, like going into their third day of training. So here we're going to actually kind of stimulate what we were doing with all the deadlifting and everything and do some more grip type work with carry ladders. So in this event, it was 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off carrying, and they would grab a light kettlebell for 30 seconds, rest 30, then a moderate, medium kettlebell for 30 seconds, rest 30, then a heavy kettlebell for 30 seconds, rest 30, and they would go through that 8 times. So 24 minutes in week 1, 24 minutes in week 2, 30 minutes in week 3, and 18 minutes in week 4. Then their third day of training, they would come in and the volume would be a little bit more. And let me go back. If you look, the first day, just to be clear, we had clusters on our deadlift, clusters of 2 to 3 sets of 3, 2, 1. So while it's still 6 reps, the intensity is higher, right? So the intensity is higher. Then we go back to our C workout, and you'll notice that the RPE is 7 in week 1, where it was at 7 to 8 in our deadlift. So instead of being clusters as well, we're going to bring down the intensity, and we're going to go more volume per set and just make straight 6s. So we have our lower power, we have our core, we have our mobility, then we have our squat, we have a pull, we have our cars, and then our conditioning, whereas day 1 was 10 seconds on, I'm gonna go back to it, 10 seconds on, 30 seconds off, and that was our more like speed power type stuff, or high levels of tension with our isometric there on the dumbbell bat wings. In day 3, we had 20 seconds on, 40 seconds off, so we're working our way a little bit more metabolically demanding, right? Then workout D, we talked about Thursday being more of a like recovery type day. So here in summer 2018, we dropped in Fury Thursday workout right here that was pretty low key, good quality movement, recovery work before we come back on Friday and hit our volume, where we were doing more unilateral work followed by Frat Boy Friday, all the buys and tries, right? So this is a pretty accurate representation of a good weekly layout following neurometabolic continuum, and would even be better, and it was recommended in this program, even better if they would get out then over the weekend and get in 45, 60, 90 minutes of good quality cardiac output to really drive that recovery so they come back again for week 2 and hit it hard. What about group training? So here's what we do here. This is our current September 2018 metabolic conditioning program. So you'll see that we have a Tuesday, we have a Thursday, and we have a Saturday layout. So we have our warm-ups for about 10 minutes, 3 minutes of instruction. Then we have our first conditioning circuit. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturdays are right there. On the far right, we have the time. So on Tuesday, we're doing 20-40s. On Thursday, we're doing 25-35s. On Saturday, we're doing 30-30s. Then their second circuit each of those days, they're doing 30-30, 30-30, and then they're doing a 12-minute thing on Saturday. So let's look at Tuesday. So Tuesday, they did skier swing, but you'll notice because it's a group thing, we have choices in here. So skier swing, then they could make it easier and do belly swing, or harder and do the kettlebell swing. Plank shoulder taps. They could make it easier and do the plank, or they could make it harder and do plank lever bell transfers. Then they have lever bell shovel to hold. If they want to make it harder, they could add in a hand switch on each rep, right? And those are each done. You would do 20 seconds of whatever swing variation you're doing, rest for 40 seconds. 20 seconds of whatever plank variation you're doing, rest for 40 seconds. Then 20 seconds of whatever lever bell exercise you're doing, rest 40 seconds, and then go back to the top 3 times through that for a total of 9 minutes. Then they would do 3 minutes of instruction on the next thing to come up. Then it was goblet squat plus alternating lateral lunge, or easier, body weight squat plus alternating lateral lunge, walking inverted row iso, or just an inverted row iso, lever bell marching glute bridge. They want easier, just a marching glute bridge. Even easier, just hold a glute bridge. Leopard crawl, baby crawl, or bear crawl. Each of those are going to be done for 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off for a total of 4 rounds. So we'll highlight what that looks like. So James is doing that hand switch on the far right. There's our body weight squat lateral lunge. Some crawling, walking inverted row iso. Lever bell marching glute bridge. So the lever bell's rolling her to the left and she's fighting that. And then a baby crawl. So the big takeaway from that is really, no, it's going to play again. I don't want to do that. Cool, it's not. The big takeaway from that is that we didn't just crush people with, okay, it's metabolic conditioning class, which maybe we need a different name, I don't know, but crush people with just driving them into the ground. We still had choices of movements that we could put people in the best positions to be successful. And if someone came in that wasn't able to even do one of the choices on the board, we can still think, 3 steps even easier on any of those and make modifications as necessary, because we're still picking movement categories and balancing out the program like that. So with that kind of an approach, we can tweak it to work for dang near anybody. Again, we're not smoking them. There's times in there where, maybe they get a little bit crushed, but it's also scalable in that it's how hard they go at it in that day. So if someone goes through those things at kind of a leisurely pace, which is how we recommend, especially starting, that's not going to smoke them. But if there's someone that comes in one day like, hey, I really want to get after it today, okay, go hard at each of those things, and you could do that. And then that's where the coaches can kind of help to pull some people back sometimes and give other people a push sometimes so they can get the desired means that they want, based on their goals. Most underutilized conditioning approach of all, the last one we're going to talk about, and the one that I think people commonly forget. What do you think it is? Lots of low intensity movement all throughout the week. So, if our person's working a desk job and all that they're getting in is, let's say, 2 days a week of coming in here and lifting and doing some finishers, they can't really make it to metabolic conditioning. Like, I don't know, what should I do? Do I need to get a membership to Golds and go in and do it? No, just what if you got up every day at work for your lunch break and you did a 30-minute walk and then ate at your desk, whatever. Like, the more low intensity movement people can get in throughout the week, the better off they're going to be. That's going to help with that aerobic base that we talked about. They're going to feel better. It's just best thing all around. It's going to complement damn near any goal that I can think of. And it doesn't need to be just walking. It could be them playing pickup sports or something. Whatever it is, go out, have fun, just stay moving. All right? Okay, picking up what you're putting down. But how do I know which exercises to use? Great question. I'm so glad that you asked. You right now that you asked. Remember this? Power, strength, assistance, conditioning, both days complementary. Remember this? That training equals intent. We talked about the expression of intentions for power, strength, assistance, conditioning. And maybe when it comes to selecting these exercises, you understand all that, but you think even within that, so many choices, so little time. Well, do you remember the drill that I said, that you should go and do at some point earlier, where you write out kind of a spectrum of choices? Okay, this is the lowest level of skill acquisition to the highest level of skill acquisition. And you can start to think in terms of small hurdle, big hurdle for type of people, and what would allow them to train with the appropriate intensity with the minimal amount of coaching. Because the more time we spend coaching and talking at people, the less time they're training, the less time they're going to be spent working towards their goals. Unless their goal is they're coming to you like, hey, I want to get my kettlebell technique down so that I can pass the SFG or the RKC or whatever coming up. Cool. It's different. We got to think context all the time. But for most people, especially our general population, fat loss, look better, move better, feel better, muscle gain, whatever it may be, the more time spent training and the less time receiving coaching, the better. And our program design can help to make that happen. So while sure, there are so many choices of what you could do in so little time, when you do these drills I've been talking about, it will actually cut down on the stress of figuring that stuff out because you're like, oh, this is what makes sense for this person. And then also, once again, not being emotionally attached to the decision you made, because maybe then you get out there and you do it, and with the layering of everything else they did in that day, fatigue levels are too high and it just doesn't work. Cool, maybe you have to go one step easier, and that's totally fine. Or maybe you feel like this: I need to make magic, I need to entertain with my programming. And I get that, I've felt like that in the past, but remember, crush goals and have fun doing it. When people are crushing their goals, they're going to be happy. And the fun doesn't need to come from exercise selection. Making progress is fun. Overwhelming people with novelty, probably not fun. Who likes to feel incompetent and silly? No one. So let's kind of toss that aside. And later on, we will talk about ways that if you want to be able to provide some fun with the basics, how you can do that. So when it comes to actually selecting exercises, we have this simple kind of cross-body approach that we do. We pair things like a lower push with an upper pull. So if we're going to squat, we're going to pair that with a row. If we're going to deadlift, we're going to pair that with a push. And then with selecting the actual exercises themselves, we use a quick process that I kind of made up here and deemed the goal intent skill down up assessment. And this came about, I was presenting to a group called South Carolina's Law Enforcement Division, SLED. So it's like their state police, but specifically like investigations and stuff of specialties like theft, murder, drugs, whatever. So my point in saying that is that this is kind of a specialized group, and these guys are not going to be working with me. They're down in South Carolina, right? And I was giving them a talk on training and how they could help each other with exercise selection. And I was talking about Mike Boyle's shit test. If you're not familiar with it, Mike Boyle talks about walking out the back door of his house, taking a step, and he feels squish. And he's like, oh man, I think I just stepped in shit. And he looks at the bottom of his shoe and, oh yeah, that looks like shit. And then he probably doesn't need to go any further. It felt like shit, it looks like shit. But if he wanted to, he could smell it. Oh yeah, that smells like shit. Why anyone would do this, I don't know, but he could taste it, touch it, whatever the next layer would be. But we don't need to do that. We know when something looks like shit. And the analogy has to do with training. If you're watching someone do something and it looks like shit, we don't need to go and just keep changing it. Sometimes it's like, hey, that was the wrong exercise selection for that person. Let's switch it up. We all know what shit looks like. Don't do that. So for these guys, I was talking about watching each other in the weight room. And we have to always think about the fact that training equals intent. So with regards to right now, like what the goal is, why they're doing that exercise, and here's how that works. So what's your goal? Like right now, someone's doing a back squat. So their goal is that at this time, they're working on the strength training component of their program. So their intent is to progressively add weight to the squat over the next so many weeks. And how's your skill? Well, using Mike Boyle's shit test, looks like shit. Does your skill allow you to express your intent so that you can meet your goal? If it looks like shit, you can get away with it, maybe. But I would argue, and I would hope that any good coach would argue, like, no, that's not our best thing. So let's find something that our skill allows us to express our intent, which would be to safely incrementally add load to a compound strength movement so that they can meet their goal of getting stronger. Key word being safely, or as relatively safe as possible, by picking something that they have skill and puts them in the best position to be successful so they can express their intent and meet their goal. So use this often when it comes to both writing a program and thinking about what your client is currently capable of, but also watching things on the floor. And we talked about not being emotionally attached to what you do right. You might have had the best idea, but if their skill doesn't allow them to express their intent so they can meet their goal, we've got to make a change. The next thing is I want to ask you, what do you see here? Do you see basic skill? Or maybe you saw basics kill. And this also came about from presenting to another law enforcement group, a full-time federal tactical law enforcement group. Third time's a charm. Full-time federal tactical law enforcement group that I was presenting to. And, I got to go observe these guys train quite a bit before I presented to them. And I watched, and a lot of them trained with tons of intensity, but they were trying to do really advanced things, and I'm not saying this was their thought process, but to me, it kind of looked like, well, I do some badass work. I need to do some badass training. And they were just slinging barbells around and kettlebells, and the form wasn't great, and they were doing things they probably weren't really ready for yet. And I knew that when I was coming in to present, that if I just came in and said, hey, you guys can't be doing things this way, like I would get my ass kicked and probably wouldn't go over so well. So in thinking about it, I drew this analogy towards their shooting, the basic skills. So whenever they were learning to use their handguns, they didn't head out to the range and start shooting. In fact, they start in a classroom with understanding the intricacies of the gun, how to take it apart, put it back together, clean it, all that stuff, how to load, unload, how to reload, all of these basic safety things, dry firing. Then when they do head out to the range, they aren't starting from some ridiculous yardage, probably starting at like 3 yards, 5 yards, working their way out. And they're not doing like, move laterally and shoot anything. They're starting incredibly basic. And it's not that it, all of a sudden it's like, okay, we got our basics. Now we just train like Rambo. No, they continually rep the basics. When they go to the range, they do the basics over and over and over and over. And even once they do get into more complex things like clearing a room and move and shoot, it still is layered on those basics. So when I was able to explain the analogy of that to training and that those basics kill, you could also use something like jujitsu for anyone who follows that. Like the things that a white belt learns can win, and do win being used by black belts in high level jiu-jitsu competitions. If you watch a mixed martial arts fight, really, really go watch any UFC card where there's multiple submissions in the card, and they're probably basic things like a rear naked choke, arm bars, triangles, things that white belts learn. It's just that those higher level guys, purples, browns, blacks, what have you, just know how to use those basics at a higher level. They know more transitions. They know more things that allow them to use the basics at a higher level. So if we can agree on that, then I can make my case for why we should stick to the basics with our training, because the basics allow us to train with intensity, appropriate intensity for whatever our intention is. Is it power? Is it strength? Is it volume through our intensity training and not breaking down due to fatigue? With our conditioning, is it again good form for prolonged periods of time? But if we feel the need to be that entertainer and pull the rabbit out of a hat, and we go for novelty and constantly having to teach people new exercises, then they're spending all this time learning, which means that they aren't able to spend time training with intensity, which means they won't really be progressing towards their goals as well as they could have. So if we can all just agree on that, then let's please stick to the basics. And if we're going to stick to the basics, we should probably define what they are. Now, I'm going to show you some of mine. Hopefully earlier, you listed out some of your exercises when we talked about power, strength, assistance. Now I really want you to list out your exercise menus when it comes to these categories around our stick figure. We had lower push, lower pull, upper push, upper pull, core. We're going to go through them. So for lower push, things like plate squat, body weight squat, goblet squat, double kettlebell front squat, Zercher squat, safety bar squat, front squat, or back squat. For me, that's kind of the spectrum for squats, right? That's an order, and there are exceptions to why we may need to jump ahead for this person or whatever, but if I had to teach someone from scratch, it'd be a pretty good list. And then after that, this is not dependent on what was before. In my exercise menu would be split squats and lunges, variety of implements, variety of directions. If I had to put a layering in terms of teaching those, split squats would be first. If I had to go below that, a good half kneeling position would be prior to that. And we would go static before dynamic. So isometrics followed by repetitions. A static foot placement, so split squat before a moving target, lunges, right? Step ups, variety of implements, variety of directions. You could do the same type of drill that I just did with split squats and lunges in terms of layering a spectrum of lowest level of skill acquisition to highest level of skill acquisition. Telling you guys, take the time to do this stuff. It will make your life so much easier when it comes to picking exercises, because you'll have your thought process defined, and you can look and you can tap into what makes sense for the person in front of you. Lower pull, I won't spend as much time on this, but handcuff hinge, kettlebell deadlift, RDLs, elevated deadlifts, rack pulls, block pulls, hex bar deadlift, conventional deadlift, or sumo deadlift. I put those side by side, just like I put the front squat and back squat side by side, because for most people, they're, especially speaking of the back squat, not everyone can back squat, and most people can front squat, especially with some type of a heel elevation if they have ankle mobility issues. But for most people, we can assess their movement and define which one is better for them. Then when it comes to deadlift, conventional or sumo, not everybody can conventional deadlift, but most people can sumo deadlift. And especially if we mess around with range of motion, elevated, block pulls, what have you, we can find a way to put people in the best positions to be successful. But again, I don't know what it is, but even with like people that are pretty green to training, it almost never fails that at some point someone will say, oh, I don't want to do sumo deadlifts. Those are cheat deadlifts. They're not cheat deadlifts. They're just the ones that your build is best for. So we put those kind of side by side, determine which one's best for the individual, and then we put them in that best position to be successful with their training. Other lower pulls would be swings, which build into our foundational kettlebell work, single leg RDLs, which we could do with a variety of implements, supine leg curls, variety of implements, and glute ham raise. Upper push, push up, lots of varieties, landmine press, dumbbell chest press, bench press, overhead press, variety of implements. Just like I did on our squat, you can come up with a spectrum of lowest level of skill acquisition to highest level of skill acquisition on these things. I recommend that you do that. Upper pull, inverted row, single arm rows, variety of implements, bent over rows, variety of implements, pull-ups, variety of grips. And even under bent over row, like variety of implements could be level of assistance as well. It could be, you know, chest supported bent over row to chest reference bent over row to head reference bent over row to finally a full standing bent over row. So you could even think of it implements as well as levels of modification to put the person in the best position to be successful, for them to learn to get towards the full exercise. Core, breathing first, and that's the main function of our core, keep us alive, prone, supine through the entire neurodevelopmental sequence. Also, a solid, stable core is going to give us access to better range of motion through the 4 knots, shoulders and hips. So breathing is first, then planks, dead bugs, glute bridges, Pallof press, chops, lifts, get-ups, crawls, carries. You know, and if you think through something as simple as dead bugs, what are the ways that we could progress that? I mean, first, and I could even come up with things below this. First, can someone just hold a static dead bug position, like basically look like an upside down quadruped position? Can someone hold that and breathe? Okay, they can do that. Can they move one limb at a time? Okay, can they move, you know, contralaterally, opposite arm leg at one time? Can they hold that extended position and cycle of breath without losing control or midsection? If we want to challenge it, we could make it ipsilateral, same arm, same leg. We could add in band resistance. We could do kettlebell dead bugs with reach, all kinds of ways that we could progress this. So once again, just like I talked about on everything else, kind of write out those spectrums of each type of exercise, and you'll have a better exercise library that you can pick from to put people in the best positions to be successful with appropriate levels of challenge so that they can train towards their goals. Power. You know, a lot of people look at this kind of stuff and think like, well, where does power fit in? Well, for most power movements, they fit into the above classifications, but a lot of them are also combinations. So medicine ball throws, just think through, like pick a medicine ball throw. We have all kinds of stuff going on. Let's say an overhead medicine ball throw with step. I mean, we've got a big overhead reach. We've got a push in terms of stepping forward. You could also argue for that, you know, push and that we're extending the arms to throw it. You could argue that it's a pull and that we're, you know, as we drive down and using our lats. It's anti-extension, a lot of core going on in there. With the step, we're kind of getting into a lunge pattern. So I don't want to overwhelm you, but as we do these things, it's no different picking power exercises, and that we've got to think about, do they have the requisite mobility, stability, and competency with these different patterns that we can put it all together and do these things. So, you know, med ball throws, kettlebell ballistics, jumps. The big thing is don't overwhelm yourself at the level that I was just saying. I'm doing that for example, but that you're going to need to use your eyes, use what you know about that individual, and make informed decisions with regards to their exercise selection and putting them in the best position to be successful. And then I know I'm beating a dead horse over here, but not be emotionally attached to what we wrote, because we may deliver that program, watch them try and execute it, and we just made the wrong exercise choice. And remember, training equals intent. So we're making these exercise lists. We've classified our lower push, our lower pull, upper push, upper pull, core, power, and then they drop in where it's appropriate on the program. And there's always exceptions, you know, like we talk about, go back to the split squat example. Is a split squat an assistance exercise or a strength exercise? Well, I think if we're going like true intensity, what can someone really train the hardest with? I could see a solid argument for saying that, you know, the squat is going to be our strength exercise. The split squat would be assistance. Well, what if someone can't squat right now, but they're cleared to split squat? Well, that's their strength work. You could also argue, hey, we want to reduce spinal loading. I would argue there's other ways we could do it. Zercher squats and the like, goblet squats, whatever. But you want to reduce spinal loading, and you're arguing saying split squat is going to be our main strength movement, our main lower push strength movement. Awesome. The big thing is have a why, have your intentions clear, use your goal intent skill down-up assessment to put people in the best positions to be successful and confirm that they're able to express their intent with these things so they can get to their goals. Man, you do all that and you're gonna have people crushing goals, having fun doing it. So super duper efficiency tip, make menus of your basics based on movement categories, steal mine. But what I have on there is not, I talked about all those additional layers of making spectrum of lowest skill acquisition to highest level of skill acquisition and thinking through that stuff. Take the time to write these things out. It will make your life so much easier. So selecting exercises, all right. How do I know I'm really selecting the right exercises, mobility, all that other jazz? We talked through it a good bit, but let's go a little bit further. We got to remember this, but we're going to talk about the FMS next week, but we're still going to go into it here because it absolutely impacts the program design. And I love this quote from Charlie Weingroff. Can you get your body into the right positions, both mechanically and neurologically, to absorb and adapt to stress? So the FMS is simply giving us information about different patterns. So the deep squat is going to give us information about the squat. You could argue more stuff with that overhead position, everything else, sure, but it's going to come out in other tests. The hurdle step, single leg balance, like true single leg balance, and that's going to come into play in things like step ups, anything transitional, inline lunge, single leg balance, supported. It's going to come into play on things like lunges and split squats, shoulder mobility, how well the shoulder's moving. And that would absolutely impact things like pushing, pulling, but also think of, someone has a powerlifting meet way out that they want to train for, and you're like, oh, they got a back squat. Well, if their shoulder mobility sucks, and in order to get back to the bar, they shoot into Macho Man with their ribs projecting out the front because they can't reach back to grab the bar with good position. We want to know that. So the FMS can give us some information about that. Active straight leg raise, going to give us information about their hinge, their ability to dissociate their hips, as well as their core stability, which is usually the cause of someone not scoring symmetrical 2s or better on this. And then trunk stability push-up. That's going to give us a look at core, as well as horizontal pushing. And then rotary stability, crawling, locomotion, rotation. So what are we doing with this information? Well, we laid out our basic exercises, and each of those were broken down into lower push, lower pull, upper push, upper pull. So we can take these FMS results, and let's say that someone was a 1-2 on shoulder mobility. Well, where is shoulder mobility on here? Okay, that's going to impact potentially their upper push, their upper pull. So we need to get curious about that. But we've also got to think outside of the box, because I talked about that could also impact their ability to grip the bar if you're going to give them something like a back squat. So you just have to think outside the box and get curious about positions and audit your program through the lens of the FMS and make sure that people have the requisite mobility, stability, and patterning with the things that we're thinking about providing them. And really, it's going to let us, it's going to give us some insight so that we can potentially add things like correctives, mobility, stability, patterning. And this is where you would use your letters, the things you've done, PRI, FRC, DNS, the things you learned at Strong First, RKC, whatever it may be. But one big caveat here is that I'll say, you don't have to correct anything. If you're like, hey, I don't know what I'm doing here, the biggest thing is do no harm, and it really comes up in this next thing. Remove any contraindicated movements. That's guided by the FMS, medical professional, and or feedback from the client. So if you don't feel like you have the skills, the current level of competency to really understand what's going on with someone, to make a change in their mobility, stability, or just why this pattern is so screwy, just remove it or modify it. And that could be modified in a number of ways: the volume that they're using, the load that they're using, the range of motion, the stance, the implement. But don't feel like you have to correct things. But if you have the toolbox to be able to do it and you're comfortable doing it, then we would make changes based on their FMS in terms of exercise selection, that we would pick things that we can put them in the best positions to be successful. Then when it comes to picking their mobility and their motor control type fillers, we would do it based on trying to improve those underlying things that will improve the pattern overall and allow them to get towards training with full ranges and do the things that we all want to do. So the screen gives us information that simply helps us to make decisions with regards to exercise selection, putting our people in the best positions to be successful. Because after all, they are here to train, right? And the reason why I add that little after all they're here to train, right, is because we don't want to become the corrective exercise guy. At least I don't. You know, if you're a physical therapist, we do have some physical therapists in Strength Action, you know, for you, sure. But for our trainers in this group, strength coaches in this group, we don't want to become the corrective exercise guy, like, or girl. People come to us to get their confidence back, lose fat, put on muscle, improve performance, whatever it may be. And sure, maybe their mobility, stability, patterning stuff will play a part in that. But remember what we talked about with exercise selection and the goal, intent, skill, down, up assessment. Do they have the skill so that they can express their intent and get to their goal? And it's the same thing when it comes to applying correctives. If we spend the bulk of the session being like, oh, we got to fix your shoulder mobility, and that's not really what they came to you for, we're doing them a disservice. Once again, not allowing them to train with appropriate intensity to be able to get to their goals. Now, there are cases where we might need to sit down with someone and be like, hey, we've got to work on all this stuff because I can't even come up with workarounds that make sense to train you with intensity with these things. In that event, okay, cool. Maybe we do need to make some changes and focus on these underlying raw materials for a bit. We got to remember that anytime it's possible, they're here to train. They need to train, and we just need to put them in the best position to be successful. So on the program, for us, this is where that information goes. So Karen's program here, shoulder mobility, 3 left, 2 right, trunk stability push-up, 1, deep squat, 1. You'll also notice that under shoulder mobility, I wrote down her hand is 7 inches, so we don't need to remeasure it every single time, right? Underneath that, we have other concerns, right shoulder tendonitis and knee pain, right knee surgery 8 years ago. She still feels it running, landing the wrong way, stairs, reverse lunges, contact on hard floors. She has multiple sclerosis. It's a big part of the reason we're training. Stay strong, put off the impact for as long as possible. So all that information helps us simply with regards to putting her in the best position to be successful with regards to her training. And here's where you see that come out. So her main focus was shoulder mobility in terms of what was going to be a limiting factor on her program, trunk stability push-up. So we have her working on planks and learning to get tall and tight. We have her doing rib grab, T-spine rotation to work on that underlying shoulder mobility. Gandalf shoulder cars to work on the motor control of the range of motion that she does have. That did impact her program a little bit in terms of pressing, but we didn't do any yet. We have a standing handcuff hinge followed by farmer carry instead of any kind of a dumbbell press or anything yet. We could have put one in, but we decided, hey, let's do this for now, right? So super duper efficiency tip. If you have the understanding of how to do it, make menus of your most commonly used mobility, stability, and patterning exercises for the FMS. But what if I follow all of this and things still just don't look right? Well, this is where the 4x4 matrix comes into play. In the 4x4 matrix, on the left side, we have 4 positions: non-weight bearing, quadruped, kneeling, standing. And on the right side, we have the type of load assistance or lack of load altogether. So no resistance, pattern assistance, no resistance, resistance with pattern assistance, or resistance. So if we take something like a basic, let's say barbell deadlift, that's standing and they're using resistance. And if things aren't going so well, we can make changes at either side. Now, remember that in the beginning, we talked about less is more, even with regards to progression, regression, in terms of making changes. So most of the time, we want to try and make the change on this side of the 4x4 matrix because it still is going to look the most like the exercise. And we'll move the left side as needed to reinforce things. But using that barbell deadlift example, if it's not going so well, going all the way to the top, no resistance pattern assistance would be having them groove the pattern again. Maybe they're bending over to get the bar and they're rounding their back like a scared cat. So we could be like, boom, get away from the bar. And I wouldn't necessarily start here. I'm just working my way from the top. We could have them step back from the bar, hold a PVC pipe against their back. Hey, maintain all 3 points of contact, tailbone between your shoulder blades, back of your head, and hinge, reach your hips for the wall. And they pattern it that way. And they're like, oh yeah, okay, that no resistance with pattern assistance reinforces the pattern. Now maybe they work their way up to getting rid of the PVC pipe, and they just rep that standing, body weight hinge. Boom, they got it. Third step would be now doing the barbell deadlift, but maybe you're holding the PVC pipe against their back for a reference point, tailbone between the shoulder blades, back of the head, feel that, reach your hips for the wall, maintain all 3 points of contact, got the bar, and then stand it up from there, maintaining all 3 points of contact. So we wouldn't necessarily have to go all the way back to the beginning. It may have been that they were trying to do standing resistance, regular barbell deadlift, and we just went back to resistance with pattern assistance. We placed that PVC pipe against their back, like, hey, remember, maintain all 3 points of contact, and then they knock out a good rep and we get rid of it and they're right back to standing resistance. They just needed it as a reinforcement. So we could use it as a coaching tool that way to elicit changes that we want on the floor. And sometimes, though, it's still not going to work and we need to change the position. So that would mean, still using the barbell deadlift, that we get rid of the barbell. We have them kneel, tall kneeling, so they're on both knees, and we have them sit their butt back to their heels and then go back to tall kneeling. And we'd explain to them, hey, whenever we sit down like that, that would be a squat. Now I want you to reach your hips backwards and your chest forward and then come back up to tall kneeling. That's a hinge. So one big level change with the hips, butt went down to the heels and back up, squat, hips reaching back, chest going forward, not as much of a level change, hinge. Maybe, the person, like we talked about the example here with the standing barbell deadlift, their back was getting round like a scared cat. Maybe we drop them down to quadruped position, have them do some cat-cow. Hey, that's what it feels like to move with your spine. Then we immediately follow that in quadruped with quadruped rocking while keeping their spine locked into place, feeling what it feels like to move with their hips and not through their spine. Then we follow that up with going back to standing, maybe resistance pattern assistance, so they can feel, that PVC pipe against their back. And if none of that's working, it's highly likely that we just have them at a level that they're not ready for, and maybe they have some underlying, requisite mobility, stability stuff going on. And we need to put them on the ground. Non-weight bearing could be, a glute bridge, just like a body weight glute bridge to learn how to extend their hips into tall and tight, and keeping their spine neutral. It could be single leg lowering, which would be non-weight bearing, no resistance. Single leg lowering with a band, which would be non-weight bearing, no resistance with pattern assistance. But you can see how you can use the 4x4 matrix to make changes. Remember, no emotional attachment to what we write in our program. Make changes to put people in the best positions to be successful with regards to their training. And then if we do make changes for any reason, especially with the examples that I just gave, we document all changes and modifications on the backside of our program. This is what the backside of our programs look like. We're going to talk about this in a little bit, but we simply document those changes down here in what's called the coach's notes area. So maybe, we changed up their deadlift on that day. We'd put an asterisk next to it, and the coach would know to look on the back of the sheet here. It'd be the asterisk, date, what was changed, and why. And that way, if that person trained in the morning one day with, Greg and myself, and they come in the evening the next day and they're working with Tommy and Todd, Tommy and Todd will be able to read that and see, oh, okay, this change was made. Plus, if we due diligence, if we followed the process, we also would have texted that change and update on that person to our coaches thread so that everyone's really on the same page and cover that multiple ways. So, what you might be thinking, all right, you're talking about basic, minimal change, less is more. It sounds really boring. My clients probably get bored with such simple programs. What do you have to say about that? Well, no, they won't. But rather than me talk at you and tell you how wrong I think you are, I'm going to let our good friend Dan John do it.
We were talking, and I talked about a good friend of mine, Rick Bojack. And Rick Bojack is a good coach, great coach here in Utah. And I asked him one day about how does he win so much? And he looked at me, he looked at me and he said, You can't get bored. And I thought, what do you mean by me? Your athletes and your clients don't mind looking better, feeling better. If little Edna showed up flabby, and now her ass is so tight that she walks around in a thong bikini at the retirement home, she's okay with your training program. Okay, she's happy with what you're doing. Don't you get bored. I got to tell you, doing the fundamental human movements with appropriate reps and sets and load is boring as shit, to quote my daughter. But as I wanted to tell her, you're also the state shot put champion and a Division I athlete. Yes, I know, but it was boring as shit. Your education's been paid for. Okay, it's going to be a battle that you don't have to fight with your client. It's a battle you have to fight with yourself.
So before I go on to that, results are never boring, right? His daughter still did the work consistently to become a state champion, to get a scholarship and be a Division I athlete, and your clients watch the same. We talked about crush goals and have fun doing it. And I know I'm being redundant here because I've talked about this a few times, but these basics done well get the job done. They allow us to train with appropriate intensity so that we can elicit the adaptations that we want, so that we can get to the overarching goal of what the client wants. And even though in the moments people might be like, oh God, it's so boring, they're still doing it. And we're going to talk in just a second here about ways that we can make the basics a little more entertaining, a little more fun with time, as needed and not overdone. But we still have got to stick to the basics. And the fight, like Dan John says, is with ourselves to not be like, oh God, this person's been doing, safety bar squats for 3 programs in a row. Well, I got to change that up. But do you? Do you need to change that up? Because what if that makes the most sense for their goal? What if they have a skill level that allows them to express their intent so that they can, reach their goal with regards to that exercise selection? And that if you change it up, now there's a whole competency thing that's going to happen. They're going to have to learn the intricacies of this new thing. They don't have numbers with that exercise to train off of, and you actually jack up their progress. So don't you get bored. And if we do want to add variety to the basics, though, we can run through things like this. So taking the basic goblet squat, I'll do a few of these. Straight sets would be like that 3 sets of 8. Tempo would mean maybe for 1 month we're going to do eccentric emphasis. So we're going to take 3 seconds on the eccentric portion, not pause at the bottom, shoot back up, no pause at the top, or just quick reset and go again. Isometric focus would mean drop down quick, hold for maybe 3 seconds in the bottom, come back up, reset into your next rep. We could control the tempo the whole way throughout, doing literally tempo squats, like 2 seconds down, 2 seconds up with no pause at either end, never locking out. The variations could go on and on, but we could mess with tempo. Clusters could mean that we would break up the intensity of that 3 sets of 8 squats. We want to train at a higher intensity because they have the competency with that basic exercise you chose for them. And instead of doing 3 sets of 8, they're going to do 3 sets, 4 clusters of 2, meaning they're going to do 2 reps, rest maybe 20 to 30 seconds, or 3 to 4 breaths, whatever, then 2 more, rest, 2 more, rest, 2 more. That would be 3 sets of 4 clusters of 2. And that allows them to train again at a higher intensity for the same number of reps, 8, with the same exercise, and still make progressions that way. Density would be messing with time constraints. So maybe in week 1, every 3 minutes, they're going to do their next set of 8. In week 2, every 3 minutes. In week 2, every 3 minutes. In week 3, it's going to be every 4 to 5 minutes. That's our reach week, right? And this way we're controlling, making sure they are getting proper amounts of rest so they can hit the weights hard again on that, reach, on PR and go home week. And then in week 4, maybe we're going to say instead of every 3 minutes, every 2 minutes and 30 seconds, or every 2 minutes, so that they're still getting done in relatively the same time, because 3 by 3 would be 9. And then they have 4 sets. So we'll say, every 2.5 minutes or so, they're going to finish in about the same amount of time. That'd be messing with density. Plus sets would be kind of like 5-3-1. Maybe they have 3 sets of 8, but that last set of 8 is going to be 8 plus. So with that given RPE, you did 8 for the first set, 8 for the second set, and the third set. If you got more, get it, but still stay at that RP of 7. So they're like, oh man, I actually got 10 and feel like I still had 3 quality reps left in the tank. Awesome. That would be 8 plus. Partial reps, we're limiting range of motion. 1.5s would be like all the way down in the squat, up halfway, all the way back down, all the way up. That would be 1 rep. Ratchet sets would be if you really hate someone, you could break it, let's say a squat into 4 levels. They would squat all the way down, up a quarter of the way, all the way down, up halfway, all the way down, up 3/4 of the way, all the way down, up the whole way. That would be an example of ratchet sets. You could do it something like the Turkish get-up, where it's, roll to forearm, all the way down, roll to forearm, up to hand, all the way back down, roll to forearm, up to hand, sweep, all the way back down, so on and so forth, ratcheting their way up through the whole get-up. Completion, using our 3 sets of 8 example on the goblet squat again. Maybe today we just say, hey, that's 24. You've got 24 reps, and we're going to do that with this exercise. And you can break it up, and it's at this given RP, break it up into the kind of sets that you want, and let them have some fun that way. Obviously, that would be a more advanced client, someone that would be able to wrap their mind around that. And the whole right side I could go into, but for time's sake, I'm not going to. If you want this stuff, actually we'll get to that in a second. Super duper efficiency tip, make menus of your most commonly used loading types for power, strength, assistance, and conditioning. So write them all out and get clear on when and why you might use them. And then you can think about intentions with them. So power, strength, assistance, conditioning. Power, maybe it would look something like straight sets, clusters, complexes, chains, ladders. Strength, straight sets, eccentric, isometric, triphasic, clusters. Assistance, straight sets, density. Conditioning, timed, fixed, variable, count up, count down work. What would your most common look like? Make menus. And if you're wondering what all the rest of those are, you can get the ebook that I put out. You Can't Get Bored, Adding Variety to the Basics of Program Design. It's going to explain all the loading types that were on that previous slide in detail, give examples. And if you sign up for that, you'll also receive my weekly program email series where I just talk about different stuff based on questions that I'm getting or themes that we're working through. And just screenshot this slide right here and punch that URL into your browser and just enter your email and you'll get the book. Or you can access that link from Strength Faction's Instagram, which is just at Strength Faction, no space, and click on the link, the link tree in our bio, and you can access the book that way. Same thing, get to the landing page, put in your email, and get access to the book. All right, so boom, they do the program, I kick them out the door. Not exactly, they got to cool down first. So for cool down, remember the FMS. Did they feel better in flexion or extension? So when did we check that? We checked it during the press up clearing test and the posterior rocking clearing test. And maybe they felt good in both. And then you can just look at the rest of their stuff, trunk stability push up, whatever it may be, and just figure out which position they would probably benefit from spending more time in, but what do they need to work on more? So that just goes at the bottom of the program. So you can see with Karen, we went cool down after every session, deep squat breathing for a minute, crocodile breathing 2 to 3 minutes. All right, 1 program down. How do I know this is working? Well, before I go to the next slide, think about it. How do you currently know with your clients if it's working? Are you assessing? Are you doing any kind of conversation with your client, talking through these things? So for us, it's a little bit of both things. We're rechecking their FMS at the halfway mark and the completion mark of every single program to see if we're getting better at those things. We're tracking our weights on our program so we can see if we're getting stronger. We're maybe checking how many rounds we got on conditioning, what kind of weights we're using on conditioning, seeing if we're improving our work capacity. So we're measuring those things. But beyond that, we're asking. So on the back side of their program, among other things, and one thing we can talk about because there's not really slides in here about it, every day when they come in, they're self-rating themselves on sleep, soreness and fatigue, pain, and nutrition. So when they walk in the door, they write their date at the top of the program for the key. They flip it over, they write down how many hours of sleep they got, self-rate themselves on soreness and fatigue, pain, and nutrition. And that's something that the volume of it. Look at an entire completed program for the month and look at how they've been doing with nutrition. And if things aren't moving in the direction we'd like and they have a bunch of yellows, maybe some reds and minimal greens on there, maybe there's some gold in there. Pain is really about, if there's no pain, they're green. That's awesome. Yellow would mean that they had pre-existing pain. We are aware of it, but it hasn't increased. That's also good. Red would mean that there's new pain or an increase in pre-existing pain. That's bad, and we probably want to look at modifying their program for that day. So that's important for us to know. Soreness and fatigue. Green would be minimal soreness and fatigue, minimal soreness and or fatigue, nothing out of the ordinary. Yellow, moderate soreness and or fatigue. And red would be high levels of soreness and or fatigue. And that could potentially impact how they're going to do on that day. And then sleep. How many hours of sleep did they get last night? They just write down the hours. Once again, could also play in on a daily level, but also looking at it over the month and being like, man, the night before you were here, at least every time on this program, you just haven't really looked like you've been getting much sleep. So it brings total awareness. But going back to how do we know if it's working, this completed program questionnaire. So every time they finish a program, they fill out this. Do you feel that you accomplished your goals for this phase? Yes or no? So right there, we asked, do you feel like it? Not your end all be all goal, but for this phase, do you feel like you accomplished your goal? Do you have any questions, comments, or concerns about that? Your goals for your next phase. So hopefully, think about the Dan John quote, the goal is to keep the goal. So hopefully this isn't like some whole new goal. Like, I know we were working on this month, but now I really want to go towards this. The reason why we ask for a goal for next phase is maybe they see something that fits into the big overarching goal that they want to work on in the next month. And when we get their buy-in, their input on that, and it molds the program, they just have that much more connection to the program they're going to have in hand. So when we have them write out their goal for the next phase, they're so that, goal for the next phase, I want to work on flipping the tire so that, and why, like I want to work on flipping the tire because I just think it looks so badass. And so that, well, because it would get me excited to come in for training and help with the consistency component. And if that makes sense for their goal, boom, why wouldn't we include that? And maybe that's not where my mind was going to go on their next program. But if it makes sense for the goal, it gets them excited about training, could be that. Could be that they say, hey, I see that my reps are going from 8 down to 4 in the next program, and I was using this kind of weight on my deadlifts. I would really like to keep you that. I'd really like you to keep that variation of deadlift in there because I'd like to hit these kinds of numbers next month. Boom. So that, I can chip away towards the strength standard and pass the deadlift strength standard. How we know it's working? If my numbers are going up. So we help people with this. We give them the sheet. We have them write it out. And then we sit down and we have a quick, 5 or so minute conversation with them and make sure that we're clear on everything. Then coming up to their next phase, once again, we don't start with a blank slate. We talked about that. When someone signs up for the gym, who do you remind me of? We go from there. When it comes to writing their next program, we simply open their first program that they just finished and they gave us that feedback on, and we just make tweaks to that. And remember what we said in the very beginning? Less is more. We don't need to overhaul this whole entire program. So here's Karen's first program. She's a real client at our gym. Here's her second program. So you can see minimal change. She went overhead medicine ball slam to overhead medicine ball throw a step, plank to plank walk back, stayed with rib grab T-spine rotation, goblet squat, stayed with goblet squat, inverted row, stayed with inverted row, Gandalf shoulder cars, stayed with Gandalf shoulder cars, standing handcuff hinge, went to cook hip lift, farmer carry, went to modified push-up. So now we're starting to add in some more pushing volume in there. Her conditioning went from fixed battling ropes, 3 to 5 sets of 10 on, 30 off, to fixed conditioning circuit, tall kneeling stability ball rollout and battling ropes, 15 seconds on, 20 seconds off. And she's getting some more time in there because she's also still doing 3 to 5 rounds, which is the equivalent of 6 to 10 now. Then the other day, water pail medicine ball throw to lateral medicine ball throw, tall kneeling static power press to wall press dead bugs. Rib grab T-spine rotation stays the same. Kettlebell deadlift stays the same. Modified push-up went to dumbbell chest press because she's doing modified push-up on the first day now. Stayed with Gandalf shoulder cars. Reverse sled drag, turned to goblet split squat. Goblet carry turned to inverted row. And her assault bike easy pace went to another fixed circuit, but now for a little bit more time even than the first day in terms of time under tension is now 30-30 of rower and leopard crawl, and her cooldown stayed the same. I won't read them all off, but you can see that program number 3, I'll point out a few things here. Goblet squat, goblet squat. And the third one, first 2 weeks are goblet squat. Then she goes to safety bar squat because we have a strength standard and she passed it. Her inverted row went to 3-point dumbbell row. We stuck with, we changed Gandalf shoulder cars to child's pose shoulder cars. Standing handcuff hinge, cook hip lift, RDL with dumbbells. Farmer carry, modified push-up, stuck with modified push-up. Fixed circuit, we increased the time of work a little bit. Then water pail medicine ball throw, lateral medicine ball throw to reverse medicine ball throw. Tall kneeling static power off press, wall press dead bugs to dead bugs. Rib grab T-spine rotation, changed to bench T-spine extension. Stuck with kettlebell deadlift because she didn't pass her strength standard yet. And she's also cool with saying, hey, I want to keep chipping away at that. Modified push-up to dumbbell chest press to single arm dumbbell chest press. Gandalf shoulder cars stayed the same throughout. Then reverse sled drag, goblet split squat, reverse lunge with dumbbells. Goblet carry to inverted row with the feet walked in a little bit further. Assault bike to a fixed circuit of rower and leopard crawl to a fixed circuit of ski erg and farmer carry. So when I said I wasn't going to compare it all again, I lied. I just did. Right? So you can see less is more. We made small changes. She can see the connection of one month to the next. We staple the programs together so she can look at her numbers over each month and continue to train on those. And then in her final program, you'll notice all of those previous 3 were highlighted. The phase was highlighted in yellow. This final program is highlighted in green, and that's because it's the end of block. We do some things a little bit differently. But one of the things I want you to notice is her goal at the very top was the same for all 3 programs. Build muscle and improve overall body shape, lose the belly, and improve throwing so that we can wreck some fools in kickball. That was her real goal. Look at this one. We want the goal to stay the goal, right? That's what Dan John says. Why did this change? Stay moving and healthy as possible and build a stronger core for an easier birth. Oh crap, she got pregnant. That'll change things. Define strong arms for carrying the baby and showing those other moms that we mean business. Listen, Janice, do you see these arms? Clearly, I'm a better mom than you. So the goal changed a little bit, but you'll see the program still doesn't need to change significantly. There are some reasons why it might with pregnancy, but for the most part, it really doesn't. And you can also see that her FMS concerns, she finally cleared shoulder mobility. So 4th program, and now she's down to just trunk stability push-up that we're working on. So going out, you can look and see, I'm really going to gloss over this one pretty quick, that her squat, she's doing safety bar squat the whole month this time. Her pull that's with that, we're working towards getting chin-ups because she's getting really strong and past our strength standard for the inverted row. And she's doing a hybrid exercise of inverted row to eccentric level 2 chin-up. She's still doing RDL with dumbbells. Her conditioning went from 2030s to 2040s, and she's doing some more intense stuff now, battling rope jumping jacks, which is big, ballistic jumping motion with side planks, isometric, but a little bit harder of a plank variation. And then dead bugs progressed to kettlebell dead bugs. She's still doing kettlebell deadlift because she didn't pass the strength standard yet, and that's okay. She's still working on modified push-up to pass that trunk stability push-up. Reverse lunge with dumbbells, went to box step up with dumbbells, and she's doing chest supported row with dumbbells to get some more weight instead of inverted row. And her conditioning stayed at 30-30. She went from ski erg and farmer carry to assault bike and plank. So you can see, once again, less is more, and we're cruising along. And that was end of block. So now the back of her program is going to look a little bit different. All of the self-rating stuff will be the same, but if we zoom in here, her completed block questionnaire, do you feel that you accomplished your goals over the last block? So like what your expectations would be over the last 4 to 6 months, yes or no? What went well? What maybe didn't go as well? Do you have any questions, comments, or concerns? And how would you like to do your end of block meeting? So Todd's really going to get into this stuff in coaching, but how often do you guys, you sign up someone for your gym and you probably take them through a big assessment process, but how often do you ever follow that up and do the whole thing again, or even offer them the opportunity to do the whole thing again? And the reality is that, me prior, I didn't. And a lot of people that I talk to don't. And so now every 4 programs, every block, we give someone the opportunity to do that again. And they can do it at whatever level they would like. In an ideal world, we'll sit down and we'll do an in-person meeting. And we're even working on some really cool stuff with that. That's beyond what they do on intake because of the context they have with training with us for so long now. Or it could be just basically repeating their initial intake and getting clear on goals again, doing another FMS, whatever it may be. And someone may also say, I really don't want to do that. I just want to get to training. And that's fine. We'll have a quick email exchange or phone call to just set some goals for the next program like we would have with any of the other phases and go on from there. But for this end of block meeting, we send them home with a form on their last day of training, and they schedule a meeting. And the form has some questions for them to think about. Do you have a long-term goal, like a year or so out, you'd like to achieve? If so, go ahead and write that below. Could be a continuation of their big overarching goal that they had when they signed up. Or maybe they're like, after training here for this long, man, I've really evolved and I'm thinking I want to do this now. I didn't even know I could do it before, and I want to do this now. If we could wave a realistic magic wand over you and you could have whatever you wanted from your training over the next 4 months, what would it be? What will you have done, or what goals will you have achieved? How might that positively affect your life? So let's think of the next 4 months as a video game. Each month is a level. Each level increases in difficulty and ultimately leads you towards your magic wand goal. Let's think about what each level would be and list all the levels out. Then we'll talk about the actions we'll need to beat each level. And, I won't lie, some people really struggle with this, and so we'll help them talk through it. And others come in and are just like, boom, each level is a month of the program. And when they think about it that way, then they're like, oh, okay, I want to get my first chin up. So level 1, I feel like I've got to work on, clean up my diet, because if my body weight comes down, it's going to get easier. And I've got to pass that inverted row standard so that I can progress on to the chin up variations, right? So level 1, they want to work on their diet and keep getting stronger at their inverted row. Level 2, maybe continue working on the diet, and they've passed the inverted row standard and they want to work on their level 1 chin up. Level 3, continue working on diet and hopefully get on to level 2 or 3 in the chin up. And level 4, finally get a hold of the bar, and maybe they're doing some band assisted chin ups or some chin up isos, and again, still continuing to work on their diet, and maybe get their chin up finally by the end of that. And that would just be like an ideal roadmap. Again, not everyone's going to have that kind of clarity. Some do, but this is where when we meet with them, we help them to think through that kind of a process. And then below that, last but not least, really, how do you want us to coach you? How would you like us to guide you through these levels? How can we help hold you accountable? If someone's getting stuck, we can use this 5-3 first form. They come in, they're like, man, I really don't know. I don't even know where to begin. I want to do these things, but I don't know where to start. We don't want to just throw answers at them, because then it's a projection of what we want, and it's not really, they don't get to take ownership of that. When it's their idea, they're that much more likely to get it done. It also keeps them from being able to say, well, you told me to do that and it didn't work, which there's any number of reasons why something might not work. So 5-3 first is an awesome drill that we can use. This came from Coach Steve-O, and we use it if people are stuck. So think about what you're trying to accomplish. What are the 5 most impactful things you could do right now that would take you closer to achieving it? List those suckers out. So for the chin up goal, maybe it's that they're like, I need to improve my diet. I need to pass the inverted row standard. I need to probably, start hanging from a bar and just get used to that grip. Once I pass the strength standard, I need to learn how to do the level 1, 2, 3 chin up variations. And, the other thing would be the level 5 or the 5th idea would be, learning how to do band assist chin ups, whatever it may be. That's pretty linear the way I laid it out. Probably won't be like that. They would list out their 5 things. Of those 5, what 3 are you most willing to start with? Of those 3, where do you want to start? And that helps them to kind of simplify down the steps. First, just think of, brain dump some things that you could work on. Okay, of those things, what are the 3 that you'd be most likely, ready, willing, and able to do? Of those 3, where do you want to start? Cool. So everything we just went through should help you to answer these things. Who does this person remind me of? That's just a reminder that we're going to open someone else's program and never start with a blank slate. What's the client's name? You should have that. Goals, reps for the block, for power, strength, assistance, FMS assessments and notes, other concerns notes, number of training days, neurometabolic continuum, movements, number of sets, loading types, rating of perceived exertion, conditioning, cool down. You should be able to answer your thought process, use things that you'll have from what we're going to get into, in terms of figuring these things out beforehand. If you can answer your kind of like fill in the blank on all these things, writing their program is going to be so easy. So make sure you can check the box. You can do that. Boom, you're ready. And what you might be wondering is, where did we get all of the information to answer each of those things? And sit tight. That's coming next week when we're going to go back and put the pieces together. with our one-on-one assessment and goal setting process.